Well, welcome back to Viewpoint. My guest this evening is Minister Paul Fletcher. He was elected to Parliament in 2009, elevated to the ministry this year in the portfolios of local government, territories and major projects. And he joins me here on the set. Minister Fletcher, thank you for being here on a Sunday night.
Very pleased to be with you, Kristina.
Oh, my pleasure as well. I need to ask you first up. Today we've seen stories that the Prime Minister, well, he's confirmed, in fact, Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull, that he's been texting at least one backbench member's mobile number to the Director General of ASIO, Duncan Lewis. How do you feel about that, the Prime Minister just handing out backbench phone numbers to the head of ASIO?
Well, look, I think the issue here is that the head of ASIO is the subject matter expert within the government on national security, or one of many, but obviously holding a very important post. Look, the way the Turnbull government operates, as all governments should, is on a calm, fact-based, objective assessment of the situation. Indeed, ASIO's very purpose is to gather intelligence and advise government. So I think it's perfectly appropriate that the Director General of ASIO should be speaking to people like Dan Tehan, who is the chair of the Parliamentary Joint Standing Committee on Intelligence. So this is quite unremarkable, and I would have thought a perfectly desirable thing to have happening, that the head of ASIO is speaking to parliamentarians and giving his perspectives.
I must say, I found it a little bit amusing, if we can just step back from the serious subject matter that we're talking about, that the head of ASIO had to text the Prime Minister of the nation to get a backbench MP's mobile number. I mean, can't they get that information some other way?
Well, he probably knew that Prime Minister Turnbull is a man who is a very enthusiastic user of all technologies. Actually, text is one of the more old-fashioned forms of technology that he uses.
Sure, yeah, he could have tweeted the number.
He will, if the information is required, he'll provide it. But look, the serious point is there is clearly it's clearly a perfectly sensible thing to do for the Director General of ASIO to be able to speak to parliamentarians, particularly people with an interest in national security, like Andrew Hastie, for example, himself a former SAS officer, Dan Tehan, chair of the Joint Standing Committee on Intelligence and Security Matters, to provide advice on the issues of the day. And that
sure, look, and I'm not going to argue that toss with you, because, I mean, for goodness sakes, what are public servants there for except to give fearless and frank advice to elected members of Parliament, to ministers, people such as yourself. So, you know, my view, for what it's worth, I think this is a bit of a storm in a teacup. We could speculate on the people who are kicking it along, but let's move on. I want to talk to you a bit about your portfolio areas. Some of them are quite important. Some of them, I think, would suggest get less attention in the national media conversation, and probably deserve a bit more. As I said, you became a minister this year. Some people might say that was a long overdue promotion. But I want to ask you first, how have you found that transition into the ministry? And particularly, has there been any aspect of that that's been surprising to you?
Well, I guess I've been able to come into the ministry after having had 2 years as a parliamentary secretary. In fact, as Malcolm Turnbull's parliamentary secretary, working on communications policy issues, and able to work on some really important areas like rural communications, where we committed to spend $100 million on improved mobile coverage in regional and remote Australia. In the end, almost $400 million, $380 odd million is going to be spent on 499 new mobile base stations around the country. So that was good experience in dealing with the kind of policy responsibilities that you deal with as a minister. In the major projects portfolio, which is essentially the outer portfolio in the Infrastructure Department, Warren Truss, the Deputy Prime Minister, is the Senior Minister. So working on significant transport infrastructure projects. This morning, for example, I was in Adelaide, joining with South Australian Transport Minister Mulligan to announce the tenders had been selected on the Darlington project, which is a $620 million upgrade of the South Road, some 3.5 kilometres. The Southern Expressway in Adelaide will now extend further north with expressway standard roads. So this is very important in terms of livability, but also safety, efficiency, reducing congestion. So these are important issues to be able to work on.
Sure they are, but let me just delve a bit more into major projects. I mean, for 17 brief days I held the infrastructure portfolio in New South Wales. I know the nebulous nature of these types of portfolios. Can you concisely define when you get involved in a major project, what is the remit specifically of that portfolio?
Well, I have a range of responsibilities. For example, my portfolio includes a lot of issues to do with the Commonwealth's involvement in motor vehicle regulation. So there's a number of things that I'm involved in also that are not captured in the portfolio, and as you would know, any attempt to capture the full range of responsibilities in a portfolio title inevitably misses some out. But in terms of major projects, yeah, there's a whole series of major projects that the Commonwealth is involved in, typically working with state governments. I mean, New South Wales, North Connects, West Connects. So North Connects is a nearly $3 billion project, a freeway standard tunnel underneath Pennant Hills Road, 8 or 9 kilometres long, $405 million of Commonwealth money, $405 million of state money. So
if the Commonwealth has some skin in the game, then you get involved.
Well, that's certainly a key factor. West Connects, for example, major upgrade of the M4 and the M5, and of course the connection between those two in the third stage. Now the Commonwealth has put in $1 billion of grant money, $2 billion of concessional loan has been provided. So clearly the Commonwealth works with the state government, in this case the New South Wales government, the excellent Baird government, which is doing a terrific job on infrastructure and so many other issues. But other projects around the country, the Gateway North upgrade.
Well, I mean, you've been involved with everything from the second Sydney Airport to announcing something about a black spot intersection at Cable Beach Road in Broome. I mean, Paul Fletcher, if I put a garden bed in my backyard, will you come and and help open it?
The reason I was in Broome, and my friend Judith Sloan, the noted economist, did post on my Facebook, "Good grief, what on earth are you doing with a roundabout in Broome?" or words to that effect. Her argument is, why is the federal government involved in some of these smaller issues? The real reason is that they're part of an overall program, and the practical reason I was in Broome was that I was on my way to Christmas Island, which is one of my responsibilities as Minister for Territories.
I'm glad you raised that, because you have been just in Cocos Island and Christmas Island, and except for discussions about asylum seekers, those territories get very little coverage in our national conversation, yet the federal government must be incredibly important to the communities there. What were some of the key insights you took out of that visit? Well,
you're right. I was in first the Cocos Islands, Cocos Keeling Islands, which is about 650 people, 15 tropical atolls around a lagoon, and then Christmas Island, which is a bit under 2,000 people in terms of the permanent residents. Now, the key consideration here is, of course, economic development and growth opportunities in these islands. Now, we tend to think about Christmas Island through the frame of the detention centre, because that's the issue that gets most media coverage. In fact, the island is a lot bigger than most of us would imagine that it is, and the detention centre is some 15 kilometres or more away from the main settled area. A number of areas of economic activity. There's a phosphate mine there, which has been going for quite a number of years. It employs over 200 people, so it's a significant generator of prosperity on Christmas Island. The detention centre itself, of course, has been a major generator of employment, although that is now down somewhat, because with the successful Abbott and Turnbull government policies of stopping the boats, the number of people in the detention centre is now much lower than it was. Tourism is a significant area, and an area with considerable potential. So 63% of Christmas Island is national park, some unique and distinctive species that are not seen anywhere else in the world. It's also an attractive spot for diving, fishing and other things, and it does attract quite a number of tourists, but certainly the question is whether there's potential to attract more, and that's also the case for the Cocos Keeling Islands.
Yep. So infrastructure obviously can assist there. Now we are coming up to the end of our conversation, and it would be remiss of me as a resident of New South Wales not to ask you, our Minister for Local Government, about council amalgamations. And all declarations of interest. I am a mayoress. This is what I, I am married to a mayor, so I'll just put that out there. But I mean, you said on 19th of November that the Turnbull government believes that Canberra doesn't always know best, that councillors and management of a local council know what their community's priorities are. But councils in New South Wales, particularly even in your own electorate, are saying their priorities are not to amalgamate. Does the Baird government know better than local councils when it comes to this question?
Local councils are creatures as a constitutional matter of state governments. Now, the federal government certainly engages closely with local councils. We spend $2.3 billion a year providing financial assistance grants to councils.
Indeed, you just gave $89 million to New South Wales councils. I mean, aren't you concerned that in 6 months some of them won't be there?
That's under the financial assistance grants program. In addition, through Roads to Recovery, for example, in fact, almost $1 billion this year will be spent.
So you're all right with council amalgamations proceeding, even if the councils don't support them?
The point I want to make is that those administrative and structural matters are matters for state government. We've seen reform programs in relation to councils in a number of states over the last 20 years, Victoria, Queensland and so on. So the Baird government, consistent with its constitutional responsibilities, has decided to pursue this course of action, and that is a matter for the Baird government. The Commonwealth obviously engages closely with state government and with local governments, working with them.
So basically, you don't have a dog in this race, is your argument.
My point is that the state governments have a responsibility in relation to how local governments operate. Sure. Local governments are constitutionally a creature of state government.
Well, then let me ask you one last quick question. Is the push for recognition of local councils, local government, recognition in our constitution, is that push no longer, is that going nowhere now?
That's not something a Turnbull government will be pursuing.
Okay, well there you go. You've heard it here first and last. No recognition of local government in our constitution. Paul Fletcher, thank you for joining us on Viewpoint this evening, and I wish you all the best for Christmas and a Happy New Year.
To you too and all your viewers.
Thank you. Well, stay with us. When we come back, we're going to have a Centre for Independent Studies